Human followed the screams, found an alien girl being grilled by tribal aliens. The dense alien foliage of planet Narration pressed against Jonathan Vega's bare torso as he hacked through it with his vibro machete. Sweat glistened on his muscular chest and arms, catching the emerald-tinted sunlight filtering through the canopy. His light brown hair, tousled and damp, clung to his forehead as he paused to check his navigation device. "Damn jungle," he muttered, wiping perspiration from his brow. "Resource survey my ass. Should have brought a proper expedition team." As a former Terran Special Forces operative, Jonathan was accustomed to harsh environments, but Narration was testing even his considerable endurance. The planet had only recently appeared on trade route charts, its potential mineral wealth making it worth the dangerous trek to this remote corner of the galaxy. Jonathan had volunteered for the solo reconnaissance mission, partly for the substantial bonus credits, and partly because he'd grown restless after leaving military service. His ship, the Nomad, was parked in a small clearing 2 kilometers back, loaded with medical supplies meant for the Centauri outpost in the neighboring system. The scanner in his hand beeped softly, indicating trace elements of rhodium in the nearby rock formations, exactly what the Interstellar Trade Commission was hoping to find. "At least this hellhole might be worth something," he said, making a note in his datapad. The piercing scream that cut through the humid air made him freeze. It was distinctly female and unmistakably terrified. Jonathan's head snapped toward the sound, his military training kicking in instantly. He slipped the scanner into his pack and gripped his vibro machete tighter. Another scream, more desperate than the first. Without hesitation, Jonathan moved toward the sound, his movements becoming silent and predatory. The jungle thinned slightly as he approached what appeared to be a clearing. Crouching behind a massive fern-like plant, he assessed the situation. In the center of the clearing, a group of primitive aliens had gathered around a large fire. They were tall, gangly creatures with mottled green and brown skin that seemed to shift patterns like living camouflage. Their elongated heads housed 4 eyes each, and they communicated in clicking, chittering sounds. But what seized Jonathan's attention was the figure suspended above the flames. A humanoid female with delicate lavender skin was slowly rotating on a crude spit, her wrists and ankles bound. Her long, straight silver hair hung down, occasionally coming dangerously close to the flames. She wore what appeared to be a damaged black flight suit, parts of which had been cut away by her captors. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and a startling shade of amber, widened when she spotted him peering through the foliage. A mixture of fear and desperate hope flashed across her face. "Shit," Jonathan whispered. This wasn't his problem. He was here to survey resources, not play hero to some alien damsel in distress. The smart move would be to back away quietly and continue his mission. But as he looked at her face, contorted in pain and fear, he knew he couldn't leave her to this fate. Jonathan quickly assessed his options. There were 7 of the tribal aliens, all armed with primitive but deadly-looking spears and knives fashioned from bone and stone. He could probably take them in a fight, but there was a risk the girl would be harmed in the process. Then he remembered the medical supplies in his ship, vaccines and antibiotics meant for the Centauri outpost, valuable commodities on a frontier world. Making his decision, Jonathan stood and stepped boldly into the clearing. The tribal aliens immediately turned toward him, raising their weapons with threatening clicks and hisses. "Easy there," Jonathan said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm while keeping his vibro machete visible at his side. "I come in peace and all that crap." The aliens chittered among themselves, clearly uncertain about this new arrival. The female on the spit twisted her head to keep him in view, her eyes pleading. Jonathan pointed to the medical pack strapped to his back, then to the girl, and made a trading gesture with his hands. "Give her to me, and you'll receive what will save your people from disease," he stated firmly, hoping they understood at least the intent of his words. The largest of the aliens stepped forward, its 4 eyes blinking in sequence as it studied Jonathan. It made a series of rapid clicks and gestured toward the fire. Jonathan slowly removed his pack and extracted a case of vaccines, displaying them to the tribal leader. "Medicine, powerful medicine," he said, making exaggerated gestures to indicate healing. The alien leader hesitated, then made a sharp motion to its companions. Two of them moved to the spit and lowered it away from the fire. The female gasped in relief as the heat receded from her skin. "That's right," Jonathan encouraged, taking a cautious step forward. "Good trade. You get medicine, I get the girl." The leader made another series of clicks, and the bound female was roughly cut free from the spit. She collapsed to the ground, her legs too weak to support her. One of the aliens dragged her by her silver hair toward Jonathan. Controlling his anger at their rough treatment, Jonathan placed the case of vaccines on the ground and slid it toward the leader. "All yours," he said, moving to intercept the female before this thing could change their minds. As soon as she was within reach, Jonathan scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body trembling against his bare chest. Her skin felt smooth and cool to the touch, despite her proximity to the fire. The alien leader picked up the case of vaccines, examined it briefly, then made a dismissive gesture toward Jonathan. "Permission to leave," he assumed. "Pleasure doing business," Jonathan said with a tight smile, backing away slowly with the female insecure in his arms. "Let's not do this again sometime." Once they reached the edge of the clearing, Jonathan turned and moved swiftly through the jungle, retracing his steps toward his ship. The female in his arms remained silent, her amber eyes fixed on his face with an unreadable expression. "You're safe now," he told her, not knowing if she understood his language. "I'm Jonathan Vega, human from Earth." She blinked slowly, then whispered in a melodic accent, "Thank you, human Jonathan Vega from Earth." Her voice was surprisingly clear, with only a slight alien lilt. "I am Vera Kix of Australis. I owe you my life." Jonathan adjusted his grip on her as they continued through the jungle. "Don't mention it. Couldn't just leave you to be the main course." For the first time, a small smile curved her lavender lips. "Indeed, I would have made a rather tough meal. The Krell are not known for their culinary discernment." "You speak my language," Jonathan observed, surprised. "Universal Translator implant," she explained, tapping a small device barely visible behind her ear. "Standard issue for Australian Diplomatic Corps." "Diplomatic Corps?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What's a diplomat doing getting roasted by primitives on an uncharted jungle planet?" Vera's expression darkened. "That is a rather complicated story, Jonathan Vega. One I would prefer to tell once we are safely away from this place." Jonathan nodded, understanding her caution. "Fair enough. My ship's not far. Can you walk?" "I believe so," she said, though uncertainty tinged her voice. Jonathan gently set her down, keeping an arm around her waist for support. Her legs wobbled but held her weight. Together, they made their way through the jungle toward the Nomad. The Nomad came into view just as the alien sun began its descent toward the horizon. The small exploration vessel sat in the clearing exactly as Jonathan had left it, its matte gray hull designed to blend with rocky environments rather than the vibrant greens of Naritum's jungle. "Not much to look at," Jonathan admitted as Vera leaned more heavily against him, "but she's fast and reliable." Vera's amber eyes studied the ship with obvious relief. "It looks absolutely beautiful to me, Jonathan Vega." As they approached the clearing, Jonathan grew more cautious, scanning the perimeter for any signs of the Krell or other threats. Finding none, he guided Vera to the ship's entry ramp and pressed his palm against the biometric scanner. The ramp descended with a soft, hydraulic hiss. "Welcome aboard the Nomad," he said, helping her up the incline. "It's a bit cramped, but it beats being dinner." Once inside, Jonathan sealed the entry and activated the ship's security systems. The interior lights came on automatically, illuminating the compact but efficiently designed space. The main cabin served as both cockpit and living area, with a small medical alcove, tiny galley, and sleeping quarters branching off from it. Vera sank gratefully into the co-pilot's chair, her silver hair falling around her face like a metallic curtain. Now in better light, Jonathan could see the angry red marks on her wrists and ankles where she'd been bound, and several burns along her arms from the fire. "Let's get you patched up," he said, moving to the medical alcove and retrieving a first aid kit. "I've got some burn gel that should help with those." "Your kindness continues to accumulate my debt," Vera said softly as he knelt beside her chair and began treating her injuries. Jonathan shrugged his broad shoulders. "No debt. Anyone would have done the same." "I think we both know that isn't true," she replied, wincing slightly as he applied the cooling gel to a particularly nasty burn. Most would have continued on their way, especially after seeing the Krell. Jonathan worked in silence for a moment, carefully treating each burn and abrasion. "So, diplomat, ready to tell me how you ended up on the wrong end of a primitive barbecue?" Vera's amber eyes met his, measuring him before she spoke. "I was part of a small exploratory delegation. Australis has been mapping this sector for potential trade routes and diplomatic relations with any sentient species we encounter." "Like the Krell?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow skeptically. "The Krell are more complex than they appear," Vera explained. "Despite their primitive technology, they have a sophisticated social structure and rudimentary interplanetary capabilities. They've been observed salvaging crashed ships and repurposing the technology." Jonathan wrapped a bandage around her wrist. "Didn't seem too sophisticated when they had you trussed up like a holiday roast." A shadow passed over Vera's face. "That was unexpected. Our initial contacts had been promising. We'd established basic communication protocols and were beginning cultural exchange." She paused, her voice growing quieter. "Then something changed. Their behavior became hostile without warning. And your team? Scattered or captured? Our shuttle was disabled in the initial attack. I ordered the others to flee while I attempted to negotiate." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Clearly I failed." Jonathan finished treating her visible injuries and sat back on his heels. "Any idea what triggered the change?" Vera shook her head, silver hair swaying. "None. One moment we were sharing information about our respective worlds, the next they were treating us as enemies or prey." Jonathan stood and moved to the pilot's seat, beginning the pre-flight sequence. "Well, we should probably get off this rock before they decide to come looking for seconds." "You're leaving?" Vera asked, surprise evident in her voice. "What about your mission?" "Got enough preliminary data to file a report," Jonathan replied, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "The Trade Commission can send a full team if they want more details." "But," Vera hesitated, "I cannot ask you to abandon your work for my sake." Jonathan glanced at her, a half-smile playing on his lips. "You didn't ask? And I'm not really the type who enjoys hanging around after the locals have shown their taste for off-world barbecue." The ship's engines hummed to life, the vibration running through the deck plates. Jonathan continued the launch preparations, checking fuel levels and plotting a course out of the system. "I should warn you," Vera said suddenly. "There may be complications." Jonathan paused, looking up from the navigation console. "What kind of complications?" "If any of my team survived, they would have sent a distress signal to Australis. My people may already be en route to Narration. And that's a problem because..." Vera shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Relations between Australis and Earth have been strained since the Proxima incident." Jonathan's expression darkened. The Proxima incident, a diplomatic catastrophe 3 years ago when a human mining operation had accidentally destroyed an ancient Australian monument on Proxima Centauri B. The resulting tension had nearly led to interstellar war. "Great," he muttered. "So I've rescued a diplomat from a hostile species, only to potentially fly into a standoff with your people, who aren't exactly fans of humans." "I would vouch for you," Vera said quickly. "You saved my life. That counts for something, even in the current political climate." Jonathan ran a hand through his tousled hair. "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, let's just focus on getting off this planet." As the Nomad's engines reached full power, Jonathan guided the ship upward through Naritam's atmosphere. The vessel shuddered slightly as they hit turbulence, but soon they broke through the cloud layer into the star-speckled blackness of space. Vera gazed out at the stars, her amber eyes reflecting their light. "Freedom," she whispered. Jonathan set the autopilot and leaned back in his chair. "Not to rain on your parade, but we're not exactly in the clear yet. We need to decide where to go from here." "The nearest neutral outpost would be Helios Station," Vera suggested. "I could contact my government from there without putting you at risk of an unfortunate diplomatic incident." "Helios it is," Jonathan agreed, adjusting their course. "It's about 3 days' journey from here." An awkward silence fell between them as the reality of their situation settled in. 3 days confined in the small ship with a woman from a species currently at odds with his own. Vera broke the silence first. "I've just realized I haven't properly thanked you, Jonathan Vega." "You said thanks earlier, Westford," he reminded her. "Words are insufficient," she replied, her voice taking on a formal quality. "In Australian culture, a life debt is a sacred bond. By saving me from the Krell, you have bound our fates together. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Look, no offense to your customs, but I don't need any mystical life bonds. I just did what any decent person would do. A small smile curved Vera's lavender lips. Your modesty is admirable, but the bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Her expression softened. However, I will not burden you with the full traditional obligations if they make you uncomfortable. Appreciate that, Jonathan said dryly. So 3 days to Helios. The sleeping quarters are through there, he pointed to a small door, and the refresher unit is adjacent. Food's basic but nutritious. Make yourself at home. Vera nodded gratefully. Thank you. I believe I would like to clean up, if that's acceptable. Of course, Jonathan replied. There should be some spare clothing in the storage compartment. Nothing fancy, but better than that damaged flight suit. As Vera disappeared into the refresher unit, Jonathan let out a long breath. What had started as a simple resource survey had become considerably more complicated. He pulled up the ship's communication system, debating whether to contact the Trade Commission about his change of plans. After a moment's consideration, he decided against it. Better to wait until they reached Helios Station. By then, he'd have a better idea of what he was dealing with, both in terms of the Australian diplomat and whatever political complications might arise from her rescue. For now, he'd focus on getting them safely to their destination. Everything else could wait. The Nomad hummed quietly as it cruised through the star-speckled void. 24 hours had passed since their escape from Narration, and the tension that had gripped them during their flight was gradually giving way to a different kind of awareness. Jonathan found himself increasingly conscious of Vera's presence in the confined space of his ship. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost hypnotic, her lavender skin catching the soft cabin lights in ways that drew his eye whenever she passed. Your vessel is remarkably efficient, Vera observed as she joined him in the cockpit, dressed in one of his spare flight suits. The human-designed garment hung loosely on her slender frame, yet somehow managed to accentuate her alien beauty. Though I admit I'm not accustomed to such intimate quarters. Jonathan smiled, trying not to notice how her silver hair cascaded over her shoulders. Exploration vessels aren't known for their spacious accommodations. The Trade Commission prefers function over comfort. Function has its own appeal, Vera replied, her amber eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. On Australis, we believe that understanding the purpose of a thing or a person is the first step to truly appreciating its beauty. And what purpose do you see in me? Jonathan asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. Vera's lips curved into a subtle smile. At first, I saw only my rescuer, a human male who followed screams and found me in distress. She moved closer, her voice softening. But now I see more. A man of principle, of action rather than mere words. I just did what needed doing, Jonathan said, uncomfortable with her praise, yet unable to look away from her gaze. That is precisely what makes humans so fascinating, Vera continued, perching on the edge of the console near him. Your species acts on instinct, on feeling. Australians deliberate, calculate, weigh options. We might still be discussing the ethical implications of intervention while the Krell finish their meal. Jonathan chuckled despite himself. Well, when you put it that way, I'm glad I didn't stop to form a committee. As am I, Vera said, her tone suddenly serious. She reached out, her cool fingers brushing against his forearm. The life debt I spoke of is not merely cultural tradition, Jonathan. It is a recognition of the profound connection formed when one being preserves the existence of another. The touch of her fingers sent an unexpected warmth through his body. You make it sound almost spiritual. Perhaps it is, she admitted. My people believe that when lives intersect in moments of crisis, the universe itself takes notice. Jonathan found himself leaning slightly toward her. And what does the universe expect to happen next? The universe has no expectations, Vera replied, her fingers trailing lightly up his arm. Only possibilities. The air between them seemed to charge with electricity. Jonathan was acutely aware of her scent, something like cinnamon and starlight, if starlight had a smell. He'd been with non-humans before, during his military days, but never someone who affected him quite like this. In Australian culture, Vera continued, her voice taking on husky quality. Physical connection is considered a natural extension of emotional and intellectual harmony. Jonathan swallowed hard. Is that your diplomatic way of saying you're interested in more than cultural exchange? A melodic laugh escaped her lips. Humans, so direct. Her fingers found his face, tracing the line of his jaw. Yes, Jonathan Vega, I find myself drawn to you in ways that transcend mere gratitude. That's good to know, he managed, his heart hammering in his chest as she leaned closer. The ship's alarm chose that moment to blare through the cabin, shattering the intimate atmosphere. Jonathan jerked back, instantly alert as he turned to the console. What is it? Vera asked, all business, despite the moment that had just passed between them. Jonathan's fingers flew across the controls. Distress signal, Australian frequency. Vera's eyes widened as she moved to the co-pilot's seat. Let me hear it. Jonathan patched the signal through the ship's communication system. A voice crackled through, speaking in a language he didn't understand but recognized as Australian. Vera listened intently, her expression growing increasingly concerned. It's the Celestial Envoy, she translated. A diplomatic vessel. They're under attack by unknown forces near the Taurus Nebula. The nebula's only a short detour from our course, Jonathan noted, already calculating the necessary adjustments. Vera looked at him, conflict evident in her amber eyes. We should continue to Helios Station. It's safer. For us, maybe, Jonathan replied. Not for your people on that ship. You would risk yourself for Australians? Vera asked, genuine surprise in her voice. After the Proxima incident? Jonathan met her gaze steadily. I risked myself for you, didn't I? Something shifted in Vera's expression. Respect, admiration, and something deeper. You continue to defy Australian expectations of humans, Jonathan Vega. I'll take that as a compliment, he said, already adjusting their course. Now let's see if we can help your friends without getting ourselves killed in the process. As the Nomad changed direction, heading toward the distress signal, Jonathan felt Vera's hand close over his on the control panel. When this is over, she said softly, we will continue our cultural exchange. The promise in her voice made the upcoming rescue mission seem even more urgent. The Nomad's warning systems blared to life, jolting Jonathan and Vera from their moment of connection. What now? Jonathan muttered, reluctantly pulling away from Vera to check the console. It appears we've entered a gravitational distortion field, Vera observed, leaning over his shoulder. Her silver hair brushed against his cheek, sending an unexpected shiver down his spine. The ship's sensors revealed they were being pulled off course by what appeared to be a concealed installation nestled within an asteroid belt ahead. That's no natural phenomenon, Jonathan said, attempting to compensate with the thrusters. Someone's using a tractor beam. Vera's amber eyes widened. Those are Australian energy signatures. This is an isolationist outpost. They maintain hidden bases throughout border territories. Friends of yours? Jonathan asked, still fighting the controls. Hardly, Vera replied grimly. The isolationists consider diplomats like me to be traitors to Australian purity. If they've identified my biosignature... The Nomad shuddered as the tractor beam strengthened its pull. Jonathan abandoned the controls, recognizing the futility of resistance. So we're about to meet some xenophobic relatives of yours who will be thrilled to find you in the company of a human, he summarized dryly. Fantastic. Vera's expression softened as she placed a hand on his arm. I regret involving you in my people's politics, Jonathan. Hey, rescuing you from being barbecued was my choice, he replied with a half smile. Everything since has just been bonus adventure. As the Nomad was drawn into a concealed docking bay, Vera moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's something you should know about Australian culture before we face them. I'm all ears. The life debt I mentioned creates a bond that isolationists consider sacred. Even they won't violate it. Her fingers traced a pattern on his forearm, but there's a deeper connection that would offer even greater protection. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. What kind of connection? In ancient times, when an Australian was saved by an outsider, they sometimes formed a physical bond to strengthen the life debt. Her lavender skin flushed a deeper purple. It's called the joining. Understanding dawned on Jonathan. You mean physical intimacy, Vera confirmed, her amber eyes meeting his directly. Once completed, the bond becomes detectable to other Australians through pheromonal markers. Even isolationists would be bound by tradition to respect it. "That's convenient," Jonathan said, studying her face. "But I don't want you feeling obligated." Vera silenced him by pressing a finger to his lips. "This isn't obligation, Jonathan Vega. I've been drawn to you since you first appeared in that clearing. Your courage, your directness. These qualities are rare among my people." The ship jolted as it locked into the docking clamps. Warning lights indicated the external airlock was being accessed. "We don't have much time," Vera whispered, her hands moving to the fastenings of her borrowed flight suit. Jonathan caught her wrist gently. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've been about anything since leaving Australis," she replied, leaning forward to brush her lips against his. The kiss began tentatively but quickly deepened, unleashing the tension that had been building between them. Her skin felt cool against his, creating an exhilarating contrast as their bodies pressed together. Jonathan was surprised to discover that despite her alien physiology, their forms fit together with unexpected harmony. Their union was hurried by necessity, yet profound in its impact. Vera whispered words in her native tongue that his translator couldn't capture, but their meaning was clear in the way her body responded to his. As they moved together, Jonathan felt something beyond physical pleasure, a connection forming between them that transcended species and circumstance. Afterward, as they hastily dressed, Vera's skin seemed to glow with a subtle luminescence. "The bond is formed," she said, touching her forehead to his in an Australian gesture of intimacy. "They'll sense it immediately." "Will it really protect us?" Jonathan asked, buckling his utility belt as the sound of the outer airlock cycling reached them. "It will force them to acknowledge you as my bonded," Vera explained, quickly braiding her silver hair. "They may not like it, but ancient traditions bind even the most radical isolationists." The inner airlock began to open. Jonathan drew his sidearm but kept it lowered at Vera's warning gesture. "No matter what happens," she said quickly, "follow my lead and remember, you've done something no human has done before. You've become part of Australian history." "Just what I always wanted," Jonathan replied with a wry smile, taking position beside her as the airlock door slid open to reveal their captors. 6 Australians in sleek gray uniforms stood in the airlock doorway, their weapons trained on Jonathan and Vera. Their skin ranged from pale blue to deep violet, but all shared the same cold expression as they regarded the human and his companion. "Diplomat Quicks," the leader said, his tone making the title sound like an accusation. "Your presence in this sector is unexpected. We believed you perished with your team." "Commander Rylan," Vera acknowledged with a formal nod. "As you can see, reports of my demise were premature." Rylan's gaze shifted to Jonathan, his nostrils flaring slightly. His eyes widened in unmistakable shock. "You have bonded with this human?" "I have," Vera replied, her voice steady as she moved closer to Jonathan. "He saved me from death at the hands of the Krell. The life debt has been honored through the joining." Murmurs rippled through the isolationist guards. Commander Raylan's expression hardened, but Jonathan noted the slight hesitation in his posture. "The Council will need to verify this claim," Raylan finally said. "You will both be questioned separately." "The bond cannot be denied," Vera countered. "Any Australian can sense it." "Nevertheless," Raylan insisted, gesturing for his guards to move forward. "Protocol must be followed." Despite Vera's reassurances about their bond's protection, Jonathan tensed as 2 guards approached him. Her hand brushed against his, a subtle gesture of reassurance. "It will be all right," she whispered. "Remember, they cannot harm a bonded pair without violating our most sacred laws." The guards separated them, leading Jonathan down one corridor, while Vera was escorted in the opposite direction. The isolationist facility was austere but advanced, with smooth metallic walls that seemed to pulse with hidden energy. Jonathan memorized their route, noting potential escape paths and security measures, old habits from his Special Forces days. They brought him to a small chamber with a single chair facing a reflective panel. One guard remained inside while the others positioned themselves outside the door. "Sit," the guard ordered. Jonathan complied, studying his surroundings. "Nice place you've got here. Very minimalist." The guard didn't respond, but Jonathan caught a flicker of something, curiosity, in his eyes before they returned to their impassive state. The reflective panel suddenly cleared, revealing Commander Raylan on the other side. "Human," he began without preamble. "Explain how you came to encounter Diplomat Quebec's." "I followed her screams," Jonathan replied simply. "Found her being prepared as a meal by tribal aliens. Didn't seem right to let that happen. And why would a human risk himself for an Australian? Our peoples are hardly allies." Jonathan shrugged. "I don't need diplomatic relations to know when someone needs help." Raylan studied him with obvious skepticism. "You expect me to believe you acted purely out of altruism?" "Believe what you want," Jonathan replied. "But where I come from, you don't leave people to be barbecued regardless of species." "Fascinating," Raylan murmured. "Such primitive instincts, yet effective in their way." Before Jonathan could respond, the door behind him opened. A female Australian with pale blue skin entered, her silver hair elaborately braided in what appeared to be a sign of rank. "Commander," she addressed Raylan with a formal bow. "The Council requires your presence immediately." Raylan frowned but nodded. "Continue the interrogation, Specialist Harris." As Raylan departed, the female Australian turned to the guard. "Leave us." The guard hesitated. "Protocol requires—" "I outrank you," she cut him off sharply. "And this is now a matter of diplomatic security." Once they were alone, Specialist Harris approached Jonathan, her demeanor shifting dramatically. "We have little time," she said urgently. "I am not what I appear." "Let me guess," Jonathan replied dryly. "Secret supporter of diplomatic efforts?" A smile briefly touched her lips. "Perceptive for a human. Yes, I work within the diplomatic corps alongside Vera. I was embedded with the isolationists to monitor their activities. And now? Yeah, I must help you both escape before the Council decides your bond is insufficient protection." She lowered her voice further. "Vera's mission was sabotage from within our government. The attack on the Krell wasn't random. It was orchestrated to eliminate her and her team." "By the isolationists?" "By someone with access to both diplomatic mission details and advanced technology," Terrace explained. "The same forces provided the Krell with modified Australian weapons." Jonathan leaned forward. "Why target Vera specifically?" "Because she advocates for closer relations with humans." Terrace's expression became grave. "There are those who believe the Proxima incident was merely the beginning of human aggression. They fear your species' unpredictability and rapid advancement. So they're framing primitive species for attacks to justify isolation," Jonathan concluded. Terrace nodded. "Precisely, and now that Vera has bonded with you, she represents an even greater threat to their narrative." "Where is she now?" "Being questioned, as you are, but I've arranged for a distraction." Terrace handed him a small device. "This will disable the security locks on your ship. When the alarms sound, make your way back to the docking bay, and Vera will meet you there." "Why help?" said Jonathan asked, studying her face for deception. "Because I believe in Vera's vision for our future," Terrace replied. "And because your actions, following her screams, saving her from the Krell, demonstrate exactly what she's been arguing, that humans possess qualities worth allying with." A distant alarm began to sound. Terrace straightened. "That's your signal. Go now." As Jonathan rose, she added, "Tell Vera to take the evidence to Ambassador Neven on Helios Station. He remains loyal to the diplomatic mission." "Thank you," Jonathan said, moving toward the door. Terrace's expression softened momentarily. "Take care of her, human. The bond you share is rare, even among our own kind." Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of her words as he slipped into the corridor, ready to find Vera and escape this nest of conspirators. Jonathan moved swiftly through the corridors, following the route he'd memorized earlier. The alarms created useful chaos as isolationist personnel rushed to their emergency stations, paying little attention to a lone human. As he rounded a corner toward the docking bay, he collided with a hurrying figure, Commander Raylan himself. "You!" Rosslyn hissed, reaching for his weapon. Jonathan reacted instinctively, driving his shoulder into the Australian's midsection and pinning him against the wall. "Nothing personal, Commander, but I've got a ship to catch." To his surprise, Raylan didn't struggle. "Wait," he whispered urgently. "I'm not your enemy." "Funny way of showing it," Jonathan replied, maintaining his hold. "Listen to him, Jonathan," came Vera's voice from behind. She approached quickly, her silver hair disheveled, but otherwise unharmed. "Commander Raylan contacted me during my interrogation. He's been working against the isolationists from within. Jonathan released the commander, but remained wary. Terrace said something similar about herself. Terrace is my contact, Raylan confirmed, straightening his uniform. We've been gathering evidence of the conspiracy for months. He glanced nervously down the corridor. But we must move quickly. The council has ordered your execution despite the bond. They're claiming it's fraudulent. So much for sacred traditions, Jonathan muttered. The isolationists have abandoned many traditions in pursuit of their agenda, Raylan said grimly. Follow me. Your ship has been compromised, but I can provide an alternative. They moved through service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Twice they encountered guards, whom Raylan smoothly dismissed with authoritative commands about securing other sectors. Impressive, Jonathan commented after the second encounter. You'd make a good special forces operative. A compliment from a human warrior, Raylan replied with unexpected warmth. Perhaps Vera's diplomatic optimism isn't so misplaced after all. They reached a smaller docking bay where a sleek Australian scout vessel waited. Unlike the elegant curves of most Australian ships, this one had a more aggressive profile. A Shadow Rift-class intelligence gatherer, Vira explained, noting Jonathan's interest. Faster than your Nomad and equipped with stealth capabilities. Anon, Raylan added, inputting an access code, loaded with all the evidence you'll need to expose the conspiracy to the Australian High Council. The ship's entry ramp descended. As they boarded, an explosion rocked the station, throwing them against the bulkhead. They've found us, Raylan said, helping Vera to her feet. The self-destruct sequence has been initiated to eliminate all evidence, including us, Jonathan concluded. Precisely. Raylan moved to the ship's controls, initiating the launch sequence. This vessel contains classified files detailing the isolationists' entire operation, including their manipulation of the Krell and plans to sabotage other diplomatic missions. Shouts echoed from the corridor outside as armed guards approached the docking bay. They're coming, Vera warned. Jonathan positioned himself at the entry ramp, drawing his sidearm. Get this thing started. I'll hold them off. The first guards appeared at the doorway, firing energy weapons that scorched the deck plating near the ship. Jonathan returned fire with precision, forcing them to take cover. Human, one of the guards called out. Surrender the traitors and we'll grant you safe passage home. Thanks, but I've grown attached to my Australian friends, Jonathan shouted back, firing another volley that kept the guards pinned down. More guards arrived, spreading out to flank the ship. Jonathan realized they couldn't hold the position much longer. Raylan, we need to move now. The launch protocols require authentication, Raylan called back, fingers flying over the controls. Almost there. A guard managed to slip closer, taking aim at Jonathan from behind a cargo container. Before Jonathan could react, the guard was struck by an energy blast from behind. Terrace had arrived, picking off her fellow isolationists with surgical precision. Go, she shouted, providing covering fire. I'll hold them here. Come with us, Vera called to her. Terrace shook her head. Someone must remain to ensure your escape. The evidence must reach Ambassador Navan. The ship's engines hummed to life as Raylan completed the launch sequence. It's ready. Get aboard. Jonathan hesitated, reluctant to leave Terrace behind. She met his gaze with fierce determination. Go, human! Prove that Vera's faith in your species is justified. With a final nod of respect, Jonathan retreated up the ramp. The ship sealed and detached from the docking clamps as the station shuddered with another explosion. Through the viewport, they watched Terrace continue her valiant defense until the docking bay doors closed between them. She's sacrificing herself, Vera said softly, her hand finding Jonathan's. A brave soul, Raylan agreed, guiding the ship away from the deteriorating station. Her name will be honored when the truth is revealed. As they accelerated away, the isolationist outpost erupted in a series of explosions, the final blast engulfing the structure completely. Will the evidence survive? Jonathan asked, watching the destruction fade behind them. It's already been transmitted to secure channels, Raylan explained, but we must still reach Helio Station to coordinate with Ambassador Navan. Vera moved closer to Jonathan, her body seeking the comfort of his warmth. You fought well back there, she murmured. The guards were not expecting such resistance from a human. Special Forces training, Jonathan replied with a modest shrug. Though I'm more impressed by your friend Terry's, that's loyalty worth honoring. Her sacrifice will not be forgotten, Vera promised, her amber eyes meeting his with renewed intensity. "Just as I will never forget how you followed my screams that day on Narration." Their shared gaze held volumes of unspoken emotion. The bond between them had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. In the quiet of the ship's cabin, with danger temporarily behind them, Jonathan felt the pull of their connection deepening into something neither of them had anticipated when their paths first crossed. Rylan observed their interaction with newfound respect. "I begin to understand why the isolationists fear human-Australian relations," he commented. "Such bonds challenge everything they believe about the natural order." "Sometimes the natural order needs challenging," Jonathan replied, his arm slipping around Vera's waist. As the stolen intelligence vessel carried them toward Helios Station and the next phase of their journey, Jonathan reflected on how following a desperate scream in an alien jungle had led him into the center of an interstellar conspiracy and into the arms of a woman from another world. Helios Station glimmered like a jewel against the backdrop of space, its massive ring structure rotating gently to create artificial gravity. As their stolen Australian vessel approached, Jonathan studied the sprawling diplomatic hub with growing concern. "If the isolationists have infiltrated the diplomatic corps," he said, "how do we know who to trust when we dock?" Raylan, piloting the ship with practiced ease, nodded grimly. "A valid concern? The files indicate at least 3 senior diplomats at Helios have isolationist sympathies. But not Ambassador Nevan," Vera added, reviewing data on a holographic display. "All evidence suggests he remains committed to interspecies cooperation." "Still," Jonathan cautioned, "we can't just walk in announcing we have evidence of a conspiracy. We need a strategy." Vera's amber eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The Australian bonding ceremony." Rylan turned sharply. "You can't be serious." "What's that?" Jonathan asked, glancing between them. "A public acknowledgement of your bond," Raylan explained, his tone skeptical. "Traditionally performed before witnesses to formalize a life debt that has evolved into a permanent connection." Vera moved to Jonathan's side, taking his hand. "It would grant you diplomatic immunity under Australian law and force all present to acknowledge our bond, including any hidden isolationists. And," she continued, her voice softening as she met his gaze, "it would make official what we both already know to be true." Jonathan felt a warmth spread through him at her words. Their connection had begun with a rescue, him following her screams through an alien jungle, but had grown into something neither of them had anticipated. "I'm in," he said simply, squeezing her hand. "But how does this help us identify who we can trust?" "The ceremony requires truth essence," Raylan interjected, "a ritual substance that compels honesty during the bonding declarations. Anyone attempting deception in its presence experiences visible discomfort. So we use the ceremony as a trap," Jonathan concluded. "Gather all the senior diplomats as witnesses and watch for reactions when we reveal what we know." Vera nodded. "Ambassador Nevin can't refuse a formal request for a bonding ceremony. It's one of our oldest traditions." "It's audacious," Raylan admitted, a reluctant smile forming. "But it might work." As they docked at Helios Station, Raylan used his security clearance to arrange an immediate audience with Ambassador Nevan. The elderly Australian received them in his private chambers, his deep indigo skin contrasting with elaborate silver robes that marked his rank. "Commander Rylan," Nevan greeted them, his gaze lingering on Jonathan and Vera. "I see you bring unexpected guests." "Ambassador," Rylan bowed formally, "may I present diplomat Vera Schuix, previously believed lost during the Narration mission, and Jonathan Vega of Earth, to whom she is life-bonded." Nevan's eyebrows rose. "A human-Australian bond? Most unprecedented." "It began when he followed my screams," Vera explained, her voice carrying the formal cadence of Australian diplomatic protocol. "I was captured by the Krell and being prepared for consumption when this human male intervened, offering valuable medicine in exchange for my life. A remarkable first encounter," Nevan observed, studying Jonathan with newfound interest. "And now you seek formal recognition of this bond?" "We do," Jonathan confirmed, "and request a traditional bonding ceremony with all senior diplomatic staff as witnesses." A flicker of surprise crossed Nevan's features before he composed himself. Such ceremonies are typically planned months in advance, with proper preparations and With respect, Ambassador, Vera interrupted, the tradition itself specifies no waiting period, only that the bond be genuine and the declaration sincere. Nevin studied them silently for a moment, then nodded. Very well. The ceremony will be arranged for tomorrow's first cycle. All available diplomatic personnel will attend as tradition demands. After they were escorted to the guest quarters, Jonathan pulled Vera close, the privacy allowing a moment of genuine intimacy. Are you sure about this? He asked softly. A permanent bond with a human isn't exactly what you signed up for when I pulled you off that spit. Vera's cool fingers traced the contours of his face. When you found me in that clearing, you didn't hesitate to risk everything for a stranger. How could I not fall for such courage? Her lips brushed against his. The bond we share transcends our different origins. It's the future Australis and Earth both need. Their embrace deepened, the connection between them intensifying with each shared breath. What had begun as rescue had transformed into passion, and now into something profound and lasting. In the quiet sanctuary of their quarters, they reaffirmed their bond, their bodies finding harmony despite their different worlds. The following day, the station's ceremonial chamber filled with diplomats from across the galaxy. At the center stood Jonathan and Vera, hands joined as Ambassador Nevin presided over the ancient ritual. The truth essence, a shimmering blue mist, circled around the gathered witnesses before settling over the bonded pair. Before these witnesses, Nevin intoned, declare the truth of your bond. Vera spoke first, her voice clear and unwavering. I, Vera Kix of Australis, declare my bond with Jonathan Vega of Earth, who followed my screams and saved me from death. Through his actions, I discovered that courage knows no species and that the future of our peoples lies in cooperation, not isolation. As she spoke, Jonathan noticed subtle reactions among the assembled diplomats. Most nodded in approval, but 3 showed visible discomfort as the truth essence swirled around them. When his turn came, Jonathan spoke from the heart. I, Jonathan Vega of Earth, declare my bond with Vera Kix of Australis. What began as a rescue has become a bridge between our worlds, proof that even across the stars, compassion and love can unite us. As the ceremony concluded, Roland discreetly signaled security to detain the 3 diplomats who had reacted to the truth essence. The evidence was presented to Ambassador Nevin, exposing the full conspiracy. In the aftermath, as the isolationist plot unraveled across Australian space, Jonathan and Vera stood on an observation deck overlooking the stars, their futures now irrevocably intertwined. So, Jonathan said, his arm around her waist, what happens now, Ambassador Kux? Vera smiled at her new title. Now, my bonded, we build bridges, starting with a proper diplomatic mission to the Krell with adequate security this time. Following screams through jungles, uncovering conspiracies, forging interstellar peace, Jonathan mused, pulling her closer. Not bad for a resource surveyor. Not bad at all, Vera agreed, her amber eyes reflecting the countless stars before them, each one a potential new beginning.